and this is mostly with respect to idea of a virtue ethics, and that I suppose that you could relate this also to either consequentialism and or deontology also, because I think that these terms can work there, but I think that they more reflect the idea of a certain character. And virtue ethics bases a lot of what it does and says on not on what ought we to do, but how ought we be? How ought we, or how ought we be, and how and who ought we be? Which is the question of what kind of character should we develop, and virtue ethics is all about developing a character. And Aristotle and virtue ethics philosophers beyond him give this formula of virtue ethics as to which basically gives a schematic as to how you should develop your character, which is in fact a virtuous character. And there's an article that's by Susan Wolf. Susan Wolf is she has her article Moral Saints in a book that I have, which is a ethics anthology by Louis Poyman. I have it somewhere. Yeah, I got it somewhere. Just so I can show it to you where it is. Maybe I can. Maybe I have it somewhere. Yeah, I got it. I think. Okay. This book, which is Ethical Theory which is an anthology which is collected by Louis P. Poyman, and I think this is a very good one. It has a lot of different things in it. And honestly, I think that it has a pretty good section on virtue ethics, which has articles by, of course, Susan Wolf, Aristotle, Bernard Mario, William Frankina, Walter Schaller, and Alistair McIntyre, and also Louis Poyman himself defends the idea of a moral saint, while Susan Wolf goes against the idea of the character of somebody that the character of somebody should be having the goal of a moral saint. And moral praiseworthiness is a kind of character which is on a weaker kind of thing than a moral saint. A moral saint is the model character of somebody who tries to justify everything that they ever do on by moral means. If this person is going by duties or obligations, they're trying to justify every action that they ever do based upon certain rules. And if they are living by virtues, and they are justifying everything that they ever do based upon the certain virtues that they have figured out for themselves that are the canonical virtues that are the canon of virtues. And I personally have picked out what I think are the 6 best virtues that a person who is trying to develop their character by any virtue ethics schematic should live by, and that would be beneficence, courage, and these all have long explanations, which I will not give here. So it's beneficence, courage, honesty, temperance, justice, and conscience, and things like patience and other stuff like that fall into one or more of those virtues there. So a moral saint is somebody who's as kind as anyone could possibly be. Now, Jesus could be thought of as the moral saint, but he actually is not, because I'm not saying that Jesus is immoral or something. I'm trying to say that because Jesus in the Bible, he points out when someone is doing wrong. He will point out when the gosh, what is it? I forget what they're called. Philistines, no. No, I forget. But he talks to people a lot in those 4 books in which the idea, or in which the life of Jesus is given, and in many a time he will say, "No, you are doing this all wrong," and a moral saint would never ever do that. A moral saint would be, "Oh, it's fine," a moral saint will probably never ever criticize someone. They would never ever say you are doing wrong. They are always kind. They always are helping people. They're always beneficents, of course, and they never have, upon this thing, they would never ever have any leisure time to where they could read or learn how to play a instrument or play a sport or do anything leisurely at all, because they would always have to morally justify their actions. So there would be no moral, there would be no justification that is immoral for playing your trumpet. I mean, there could be, but there would always be something better if you were doing something leisurely for yourself. Then there would be a stronger thing that would, make playing your trumpet not justified, and thus there would be something more moral that you could be doing otherwise. So, a moral saint is someone who is thought of by certain philosophers as the ultimate goal for anybody trying to develop a virtuous character. Because in virtue ethics you have arte, which is excellence, and you're supposed to live based upon virtues, of course, which is what excellence is. You're supposed to live by those things and be an excellent person. Then you have phronesis, which is practical wisdom, which you are supposed to have a wise head on your shoulders as to what action you should take given those certain virtues, and thus you have a habitual build-up of a virtuous character. And the moral saint is stated by certain philosophers to be that goal for any virtue ethics schematic, or virtue ethics formula, if you want to call it that, whatever you want to call it. Susan Wolf argues that the moral saint is not the goal, primarily because this person will be boring, dull, and bland, because they would not have time to develop a personality. They would not have time to have leisure, because you are who you are based on what you do. You are interesting if you go on cruises and play the trumpet for people. You are interesting if you are a philosopher who reads and does speeches and teaches and such. You are interesting based upon what you do in your life, and you become skillful at things, and then that is how you become a interesting person. that's also how you learn things and get, and it's how you learn things and get through life, basically. But a moral saint would not be able to morally justify any leisurely action for themselves. They would never ever be able to justify reading a book, reading a plain fiction mystery book, for example. They would never be able to morally justify that, because there would always be something more moral that they could be doing in that time, which would be beneficent to others. So in the moral saint's character, there's no room for justification for non-moral action. Reading any book is a non-moral action, and there's no justification in the moral saint's character and life that would ever justify that, ever. So her argument is that the moral saint should not be a goal for any kind of character to gain in any ethical formula. Now, personally, I would have to agree, because, for one, she's right. The person would be dull and bland and would have no wit and would not be interesting, and thus would have no effect on the world at all, and would thus make no would make no progress anyways. Secondly, I think that the idea of a moral saint is impossible, because nobody is going to ever do that. Nobody will ever try to move towards that character. However, I would think that a different kind of character should be a goal for specifically a virtue ethics ethical formula, because I think that in any kind of virtue ethics or eudaimonism, you should have in your goal as one of your goals a virtuous character with which you have gained a certain state of flourishing, or eudaimonia. I have trouble saying the word for some reason. For some reason, I have trouble saying the word eudaimonia. But that flourishing, or eudaimonia, is a goal for any virtuous character, which is using arte and phronesis to have a habitual build-up of a virtuous character. And I think moral sainthood is not quite a part of the whole thing, and that's it's not really a part of that flourishing either. However, I think that there must be some level of moral praiseworthiness a part of that. Moral praiseworthiness is something weaker than moral sainthood, which you are moderately, because nobody can be entirely beneficent, entirely good, entirely virtuous. A morally praiseworthy person is moderately beneficent, moderately virtuous, moderately just, moderately honest, moderately courageous, moderately temperate, moderately conscientious. Because, and I think we can go above that moderate level of, virtuous character in that idea of moral praiseworthiness. But there's a certain level that we can't get beyond, and the moral saint is way, way beyond that. And I think none of us are moderately morally praiseworthy. There is very, 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 very few of us that are at least moderately morally praiseworthy. Most of us are in a very small way morally praiseworthy, and I think that the idea of being moderately morally praiseworthy should be a goal, which would where a lot of your actions are set up against moral justification, and I don't know, I think should be the way any kind of normative ethical theory, whether it be consequentialism or deontology, or in my opinion it should be virtue ethics. The idea of being at least somewhat more preferably moderately morally praiseworthy should be the goal in any kind of virtuous character. If anyone has any opinions on moral sainthood or praise